Welcome to the tutorial for lesson number 5 of Celtic Christianity Online. This week we'll be taking a look at the shaping impact of monasticism in the Isles. Our journey will take place in 2 parts. In part 1 we will consider what monasticism is, how it came to the Isles, and what characterized Celtic Christian monasticism. Meanwhile, in part 2, we'll take a look at the unique phenomenon of the peregrinatio. It may come as no surprise that we've already met several monastics in our time together, as Christianity in the Isles was deeply marked by monastic culture. For example, we have met St. Patrick. Although he is not a monk according to his own writings, he did establish many communities of consecrated, shared living. We have encountered St. Bridget, a nun, St. Columba, a monk, St. Ninian, and the Venerable Bede. Before we go about defining exactly what monasticism is, a word of warning. Contrary to much popular, and even earlier scholarly opinion, monastic culture did not replace diocesan organization in the Isles. A diocese, or bishopric, is an ecclesiastical district under the supervision of a bishop. This diocese is then further divided into parishes, which are administered by priests. This structure existed as part of the same church organization as monasticism. Both monasticism and the bishopric existed side by side. However, the reason that we speak of monasticism more within the Celtic Christian context, the diocese left far fewer traces as compared to monastic culture, as local parishes tended to produce very few written accounts and less durable material culture. What then do we mean by monasticism? Monasticism is the term for intentional living out of an attentive life, centered on spiritual values and goals, removed in varying degrees from the rush of wider social life. Those who enter monastic orders are identified either as monks or nuns. These monastics may live in solitary or eremitic lifestyles, or in communal or cenobitic lifestyles. The eremitic lifestyle is very similar to that of a hermit, whose community is called a hermitage, while that of the cenobitic community is called a monastery. Monastic life maintains its sharp spiritual focus through careful practices of prayer, work, and self-discipline, as guided by an abbot or abbess. Both abbot and abbess are derived from the aromatic word abba, or father. Celtic Christianity was deeply marked by monastic spirituality, which was inspired by the tradition of the desert fathers and mothers of the Christian East. Often when speaking of monasticism, you will hear the term asceticism brought up. What is meant by asceticism? An ascetical practice is one which is self-disciplined. The term for these practices as a whole is what is known as asceticism. Both of these terms originate from the Greek word asketes, meaning one that exercises or trains. Think of an athlete and the rigorous self-discipline needed to be the best at that specific athletic venture. Ascetical practices include practices like abstinence and fasting. The purpose of ascetical practices include a deepened awareness of the self and environment, sharpened discernment, and ultimately spiritual freedom. Within the Isles, we see a variety of ascetical practices, which range from being quite severe to being moderately balanced. Consider here one of our 3 paradoxes. An austere ascetical inclination also coincide with a love of the human community, of the natural world, and of the arts and scholarship. Both asceticism and monasticism come to the Isles through the way of the desert fathers and mothers. These individuals are Christians who left the distractions and attachments of urban living to live as hermits in the deserts of the Christian East. These were mainly in modern-day Egypt, but also within Palestine and Syria at the beginning of the 3rd century. A founding figure in the movement, and probably the most well-known, was Saint Anthony the Great, pictured here with Paul of Thebes. Saint Anthony was a hero among the Celtic Christian and appears in several high crosses. We will see examples of this in Lesson 8 when we view the high crosses in detail. The words hermit and hermitage have their origins in the Greek word eremia, which means literally desert. Seen here is the area which this movement took place. It is mostly within the Nile and the Nile Delta. Note the location of Saint Anthony the Great's monastery. He is celebrated as the founder of the Eremitical Christian monasticism. Note also the monastery of Saint Pachomius the Great, celebrated as the founder of the Cenobitic Christian monastic tradition. The influence of the Desert Fathers and Mothers is evident within the names of places within the Isles. Here are some examples. Desert Diarmada in County Kildare, Ireland. The town of Desert in Fife, Scotland. The village of Desert in Wales. All these places contain the word desert and indicate that they may have once been the locations of hermitages. Seen here is one of the high crosses at Desert Diarmada. Although we see echoes within the place names of this desert heritage, the question is, how exactly did monasticism move from the Desert Fathers and Mothers into continental Europe and then into the Isles? It was brought first to Western Europe by travelers, notably John Cassian. Cassian spent years with monks in the eastern deserts, and later founded 2 monasteries of his own in southern Gaul. We know of this through Cassian's own writings, also through Martin of Tours. He also embraced desert spirituality, and as we saw last time, was held in high esteem by the insular Christians. Seen here is an image of Martin of Tours. In addition to place names, the influence of the Desert Fathers and Mothers is evident in architecture. Seen here is the exterior of the monastery of St. Anthony. Consider this in comparison to the clochen or beehive huts on the Isle of Skellig Michael. You see here a very similar shape. The Skellig Michael Monastery was founded between the 6th and 8th centuries and was in operation until somewhere in the 12th century. Although Skellig Michael is built out of stone, the earliest Celtic monasteries were mostly constructed of wood and a woven lattice of wooden strips dabbed with soil, clay, or mud. As such, they have left little trace. However, stone buildings were often later erected on these earlier sites, from the 12th century onwards, which is the archaeological evidence that we still have today. Consider for a moment the monastic foundations in Ireland between the 5th and 8th century, as seen here. Note that especially within the northern part of Ireland, they're quite numerous. Within the Isles, monasticism took on unique Celtic features. One of these is evident in monastic schools. Monasteries of the Isles, especially in Ireland and those founded in the rest of the Isles by Irish monks, were renowned for their high-quality scholarship and fine craftsmanship. They attracted students from throughout the Isles and beyond. These schools were established in quick succession, possibly as early as the late 5th century, but certainly in the 6th and 7th centuries. They eventually spread to the continent by way of the scholar monks from the Isles. Consider here the paradox presented of Celtic Christianity both being insular yet still connected to continental Europe. Another unique Celtic feature is found within the scriptoria. A scriptoria refers to a workshop where manuscripts were written and decorated, which is a common feature of Celtic monasteries. Manuscripts of astonishing beauty were produced. For example, as seen here, the Book of Kells. This book was most likely created at the monastery of Iona. We will be returning back to this specific book in Lesson 7. Another unique feature of Celtic monasticism is its embrace of metalworking. Monasteries continued the long pre-Christian tradition of breathtakingly sophisticated metalworking, which is now directed towards making liturgical objects such as chalices, crosses, and croziers. Liturgical just means that the item has to do with or will be used in liturgy, that is, within public worship and prayer. Seen here is the famous Ardagh chalice. Note the combination of materials and the depth of knowledge that would have been needed to create such a piece. Within the gold we see curvilinear designs, very characteristic of the Latane style. With the Ardagh chalice we come to the end of Part 1. Join me for Part 2, where we will be discussing the phenomena of peregrinatio and the understanding of martyrdom within the Isles.